The Internet's Darkest Conspiracy Theories, Volume 4. Now we have a bunch of really interesting theories spanning from what happens when our simulated reality gets shut down, to theorizing about where all the life in the universe is, all the way to what the US really did after World War II. So wasting no time, let's get straight to the theories. The simulation shutdown theory. So you guys know how sometimes you are playing a video game and it glitches, like all of a sudden your character either falls to the floor or a wall disappears or even just like the whole game freezes. Well, what if that is happening to us in real life? Let me back up real quick. The simulation hypothesis. There is some really smart people out there, like actual scientists and philosophers, not just, unemployed tinfoil hat wearing losers like myself, who believe that everything we touch, everything we see, and everything we feel might not be real. Things like the trees and your bedroom and your creepy neighbor, all of it might just be a code running inside of some insane computer. Now that's the simulation hypothesis, and I'm not saying that it's true or anything, but for the sake of this theory, let's just assume that we are in a simulation right now and not in the base reality. So as we all know, every computer needs power to run, right? And the more stuff that happens on screen, the more power the computer needs. Well, we have 8 billion people on Earth right now. 8 billion people making decisions, feeling feelings, living complicated, messy lives every single day. Now that right there is a lot of stuff for a computer to keep track of. And let's be honest, things have been pretty weird lately. I think we can all kind of agree to that. Like, the weather has been weird. For example, I live in Colorado and it's been like 70 like the past 2 weeks. In February, we might be heading towards World War III. There's supposedly a fake Jim Carrey running around. The Epstein files are bizarre. I think we can all sit here and be like, all right, pretty weird right now. Well, the simulation shutdown theory says that there is a point in the simulation where whoever built this whole thing basically just pulls the plug. Either the simulation gets too expensive, too complicated, or just gets too broken to keep it going. And that's assuming that there is some alien being from, 5,000 years in the future that is simulating our reality. Now, literally nobody knows if we are getting close to that point, but what if we are? What would that look like? Would we get any warning, or would we just blink out of existence one day without ever knowing it happened? I think it's pretty fair to say that if we are currently in a simulation, then there will be an end to it. Just like a video game. When the video game is in its prime, you have people constantly updating it and fixing issues. But then at a certain point, the creators of the video game just neglect it and move on to the next video game or, the next project. The simulation shutdown theory suggests that at some point, our simulated reality will shut down, and that means the end of life as we know it. The Black Eagle Trust Theory. So after World War II, after the good guys won and the bad guys lost, the Allied forces began sweeping through Europe and Asia. And what they found were massive stockpiles of gold. Nazi gold and Japanese gold. And it was billions of dollars worth of treasure that these regimes had been stealing from other countries for decades. Now, supposedly, most of that stolen gold and treasure that was found got returned to its rightful owners. But come on, you think that the US of A found billions of dollars in gold and returned it? You're out of your mind. The Black Eagle Trust Theory says that a small group of very powerful American officials looked at all of that gold and said, you know what? Let's just keep it. And not only are we going to keep all of this gold and the treasure, but we are also going to use it to fund whatever we want for eternity. There's going to be no oversight from Congress and no accountability from the American people. It was basically a secret slush fund that the most powerful people in the world could dip into whenever they needed to do something that they definitely weren't supposed to be doing. Now, the man behind this Black Eagle Trust is a man named John McCloy. Now, Johnny, during World War II, was the Assistant Secretary of War, so he was in one of the most powerful military positions in the whole entire country. Now, after World War II, John McCloy conveniently became the president of the World Bank. The World Bank, that bank? Yeah, Then after that, Johnny became a chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank, which is one of the biggest banks in the world. And if that wasn't enough, he also ran the Council on Foreign Relations, which is basically the most powerful foreign policy organization in America. Now here's the thing that really gets me in this whole entire thing. John McCloy, during the 1936 Olympics, was sitting in Adolf Hitler's personal box at the Olympics. He wasn't in the crowd, he wasn't in the stands, he was in Adolf Hitler's box. And then a decade later, he becomes the man who decides what happens to all of Hitler's gold. I mean, I'm not saying that means anything, but come on, it's just a little fishy. Well, you want to hear something else that's even more fishy? There are some researchers out there, again, not just unemployed losers like me, who believe that the Black Eagle Trust is directly connected to September 11th. Now, the theory says that there were something like $240 billion worth of bonds connected to the Black Eagle Trust that were set to expire on September 12th, 2001, the day after 9/11. Now, guess what? The office that was investigating those bonds, well, it was in the section of the Pentagon that got hit on 9/11. And how about the financial records that could have proved all of this? Well, they were conveniently stored in the World Trade Center. I mean, I'm not saying that the attacks were staged to cover up a secret Nazi gold fund, but I mean, it definitely gets you thinking, you know? So was there a secret pool of stolen war gold funding decades of covert operations that nobody was ever supposed to know about? I mean, maybe, but also probably not, but also it's like maybe, it's very likely, who knows? The Finders Cult CIA cover-up. In 1987, in good old Tallahassee, Florida, there was a man at a park who was sitting on a bench, just minding his own business, when he looked over and he saw 6 little kids. Now, these kids were dirty, they were covered in bug bites, and they were obviously malnourished. And they were accompanied by 2 adult men. Now, these 2 men couldn't explain who these children were or where their parents were, so the man called the cops. And the cops showed up and they arrested the 2 guys and they brought all of the children into the station, which sounds like a pretty, normal Tuesday in Tallahassee, you know? Anyways, the kids got questioned and they started talking about this group they belonged to called the Finders. So police traced it back to a warehouse in Washington, D.C., and then they raided that warehouse. Inside of the warehouse, they found some pretty crazy shit. They found documents about how to obtain children. They found photographs of kids in what investigators described as cult rituals. And they also found evidence of travel to North Korea, Russia, and Vietnam. And if you didn't know, we should all know by now, those places were no-go zones for American citizens at the time. So somebody had to approve of that travel, and I wonder who could have done that. The US government. Dun dun. So the supposed leader of the Finders was a guy named Marion Petty. Now, Marion's wife worked for the CIA, and he also had a son. And guess where his son worked? Air America, which, if you don't know, it was basically a CIA front airline. But those are just, small little coincidences. There's really nothing to see there. But back in Florida, the police were building up a pretty serious case about this Finders cult who were trafficking children or doing, whatever they were doing. And guess what? Well, the CIA showed up to Florida and told the local law enforcement, along with US Customs, to basically back off. The whole thing got quietly labeled as a CIA internal matter, and the investigation just got shut down. Every single person who was allegedly involved with the Finders cult walked free, not a single conviction, which it's like there seems to be a long history or some repeating patterns here. You've got a cult who obviously has something to do with trafficking children or doing something with children, and then all of a sudden the CIA comes in and is like, no, you guys aren't investigating this, everything's all good in the hood, blah, blah, blah. No one gets charged for anything. Does that sound familiar to anybody, or am I just tripping? Anyways, in 2019, the FBI released 650 pages of documents on the Finders. Now, in the document, an FBI agent asked a CIA agent directly if their investigation was quote unquote treading on anyone's toes. And you know what the CIA guy said? He said, sort of. Sort of. Like, what? What are we even talking about here? You've got malnourished and homeless looking children, a warehouse full of deeply disturbing evidence, the leader of this whole thing's family is all wrapped up in intelligence agencies, and then you have a federal investigation that got killed the second that the CIA showed up. I mean, literally, what are we even talking about here? But what exactly were the finders finding, if you will? And who exactly didn't want us to know about it? I mean, the CIA, according to the theory. But other than that, I mean, we really don't know much else about the Finders cult and why the CIA covered it up. The Berserker probe hypothesis. So we all know that there are billions upon billions of stars in the universe, right? And, you know, we know that scientists keep finding planets around those stars that could support life. And yet, in all of our years of pointing satellites and telescopes and antennas at the sky, we have heard we haven't heard anything. Literally, it's been absolutely nothing. It's been dead silence. Not a single alien transmission, not a signal, not a blip, nothing. Now, you could say that that's pretty weird. I mean, the universe is 13 billion years old, and we've only been around for a couple 100,000 years. So, statistically speaking, there should be civilizations out there that are millions of years ahead of us. But none of them have ever made contact with us. I mean, I would have assumed that by now, at least one alien would have, butt dialed us, but no. Now that right there, the universe being completely dead and silent, is a different theory by itself. That's called the Fermi paradox. Basically, the Fermi paradox is just, where is everybody? Well, the Berserker probe hypothesis is the direct answer to that question. So the hypothesis says that at some point, a very advanced alien civilization built self-replicating robotic probes that they sent out into space. Now, the idea was that these probes would copy themselves over and over. Then they would spread across the galaxy and they would explore everything, which, is actually kind of cool. Like, it sounds pretty cool. They're just little, robot explorers just out there seeing the universe. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but what if, and hear me out, one of those civilizations, just one out of, however many there were, built these probes to be a little different? What if instead of programming them to explore the universe, they programmed them to destroy the universe, to hunt down any signs of intelligent life and just erase it? Now remember, these probes supposedly replicate themselves, so you send out 2 probes, and then they turn into 4, and then 8, and then 16, and so on and so forth. Now over time, you've got this unstoppable robot army that has been quietly patrolling the galaxy for millions of years, destroying every civilization it finds, which in return would explain why the universe is so quiet. It's because everybody's already gone. The probes got to them first. Now, scientists at the very prestigious Oxford University actually did the math on this, and they figured out that even a slowly spreading set of these probes would have more than enough time to reach us already. Now, I'm gonna give you guys some options. Option A is that the probes don't exist and this is all just speculation, or option B, the probes are waiting for, God really only knows what. But if you took option B, then at any moment these probes could enter Earth's atmosphere and take us all out. And, how would we even know? I guess we'd see little probes, bursting from the sky or whatever, but very crazy to think about. The Google Electoral Manipulation Study. Now, we all use Google. I can almost guarantee that at some point today, each and every one of you watching has Googled something, whether that be the weather, what's going on in the world, and which, let's be honest, even Google doesn't know what the is going on, or maybe even just to see what pizza places are near you. The point is, you used Google. We all use Google every single day, but that could become sort of a problem because Google may be a little biased. Now, there's a Harvard-trained psychologist named Robert Epstein, who I didn't look into it, but hopefully he doesn't have any connection to Jeffrey Epstein, but he published a study called the Search Engine Manipulation Effect. The basic idea is that whatever Google puts at the top of your search results, you automatically trust it. You don't even question it. The first thing that pops up must be the truth, because let's be honest, we are all too lazy to even dig a little deeper to just check different sources. That's just, how we are nowadays. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you Google the best fried chicken near you, of course you're going to only look at the top results. But what happens if you're Googling something actually important, like maybe which presidential candidate should I vote for? Well, Robert Epstein ran experiments on this with thousands of participants, and what he found was that by simply changing the order of search results, he could shift the opinions of undecided voters by 20% or more. In some groups, it was as high as 80%. The messed up part is that almost nobody noticed that it was happening. The test subjects just thought that they were doing their own research and they were making up their own minds. They literally had no idea that any of this was going on. Now, Epstein took all of this to the United States Senate in 2019 and testified under oath that Google's search algorithm likely shifted somewhere between 2.6 million and 16 million votes toward Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. I mean, granted, it didn't really matter, but still. Now, Google called it a poorly constructed conspiracy theory and said that they would never manipulate results like that. Like, how dare you even accuse Google of such a heinous thing? And I don't know if you guys remember during the 2024 election, but there was a scandal, I guess you could call it, where if you Googled, where do I vote for, one person, Google would instantly pop up, the nearest voting center. But then if you Googled, where do I vote for the other candidate, it wouldn't pull up a nearby voting center. I just remember seeing that all over social media, and I don't know if anybody has ever looked into that or what was going on over there, but I think you guys kind of get the idea. Now, I would never accuse Google of search engine bias or manipulation, but Google's algorithm is completely secret. I mean, nobody outside of Google knows how it works. So I think it's a pretty fair thing to be concerned about how the biggest search engine in the world works and how its algorithm behaves. I feel like that should just be common knowledge for all of us. Like, it should just be out there just so we can, maybe clear up the rumors here. The Medea Hypothesis. All right, let's talk about Mother Nature for a second here. So we all know Mother Nature. We are very familiar with her doings. But the idea behind Mother Nature is that Earth is like this nurturing, loving presence that sustains all of us and keeps everything in balance. And then occasionally, Mother Nature gets wine drunk and she would randomly, punch one of her kids, which is us, with tornadoes and earthquakes and stuff. You get where I'm going? Well, what if all of that is completely wrong? A long time ago, there was an idea called the Gaia Hypothesis. Now, I think it's pronounced Gaia, G-A-I-A, Gaia, whatever. It says that life on Earth is self-regulating, that nature, left alone, will always find a way to keep things balanced and habitable. The planet looks after its own, which is a very comforting and very sweet idea. But then a paleontologist named Peter Ward, who is a professor at the University of Washington and also works with NASA, came along and took this very comforting and sweet idea and he just shit on it. He took one look at the Gaia Hypothesis and said, no, absolutely not. Then he wrote a whole book about why life on Earth is actually doing the exact opposite, and he called it the Medea Hypothesis. Now, the Medea Hypothesis says that life on Earth is not nurturing itself. It's actually actively destroying itself, and it's been doing it this whole time. Mother Nature isn't just getting wine drunk a few nights a week, she's a full-blown alcoholic who hates her children. I mean, Medea, for the 99% of you that probably don't know what that is, was literally a mother who killed her own children, according to Greek mythology. Now, Peter Ward went back through the entire history of mass extinctions on this planet and found that almost every single one of them were caused by life itself. Not asteroids, not volcanoes, just life. Plants and microbes absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Nice, except when they suck up too much of it. Then the planet freezes and everything dies. Then when other microbes overheat the oceans, the water stops mixing, the deep water runs out of oxygen, and these bacteria at the bottom start pumping out hydrogen sulfide gas, which is toxic. Then that shreds the ozone layer, and then basically everything dies again. Peter Ward says that we humans are the last Medean event. We are life doing what life has always done. We are consuming everything, we are changing the environment, and we are slowly making the planet less habitable. And it's not because, we're evil alcoholics or anything, it's literally just because that's what life does, apparently. So according to this theory, or I guess the hypothesis, Mother Nature isn't protecting us. Apparently, Mother Nature has actually been trying to kill us since the beginning. Thanks, Mom. The Patent Suppression Bureau theory. Now, as someone who drives a motor vehicle, every time I'm at the gas station, I think to myself, probably just like all of you have, why am I still paying for gas? Like, there has to be a better way to power a car that doesn't cost shekels, Well, what if someone has? And what if the government knows about it? And what if they just decided that us peasants aren't allowed to have it? Now, there is an actual signed, on the books, federal law called the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. It basically says that when somebody invents something and files for a patent, the government gets to look at it first. And if they decide that they don't want you to have that invention, they can put a secrecy order on it, lock it in a vault, and then tell the investor some bullshit or threaten them not to tell anyone about their invention. And if the inventor doesn't listen, that would be 2 years in federal prison for talking about something that they invented in the United States of America. Yeah. Now, according to data that was obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, as of right now, there are currently over 6,500 inventions that are sitting under secrecy orders. That's 6,500 things that some person invented, they then filed a patent for, and then they just had the government take it and lock it away. Crazy. There's also allegedly a leaked document from 55 years ago that showed us that the categories of these inventions were power supplies, propulsion systems, solar panel technology, and then unique materials and devices. So 6,500 inventions are currently locked away that could possibly be huge leaps in those categories. And the funny part is that, sure, if someone invents something like an explosive device or something, I get it, lock that up. We shouldn't be inventing new bombs for people to buy or make or whatever. Like, that makes sense, lock that somewhere. I get it. But patents were, and I guess are, being suppressed for threatening economic stability. Basically, if your invention would put a major industry out of business, sorry, bud, it's just not happening. It's kind of like the Stanley Meyer story. So in the 1980s and the 90s, there was an American inventor named Stanley Meyer who apparently developed a water fuel cell. Now, that water fuel cell could power a car using only water instead of gasoline. Now, in the late 1990s, Stanley Meyer was apparently at an investor meeting at a restaurant when he suddenly ran out of the restaurant holding his throat, saying, "They poisoned me." He then collapsed right there and he died. And now that's not a confirmed story, but what implication would the economy face if there was a water-powered car? Well, the oil industry would certainly take a hit, and that right there is what the US government calls threatening economic stability. So the theory here is basically just saying that if the government deems that an invention could mess with something like the oil industry or whatever it may be, that they will bury the invention and lock it in a vault somewhere. This invention could change the world forever in a positive way, but if the government thinks that it threatens any institutions, they will suppress it. Didn't you guys know that all the government and most politicians, didn't you know that all they care about is money? It doesn't matter if the invention could save a bunch of citizens or help a bunch of American citizens. Boom, we just care about the money. The quantum immortality trap. Now, there's an idea in physics called the many worlds interpretation. Now, it was proposed by a physicist named Hugh Everett in 1957, and it basically says that every single time something happens, the universe splits. Every decision, every coin flip, every subatomic particle doing its little thing creates a branching reality. So right now, at this very moment, there are an infinite number of parallel universes where slightly different versions of everything are happening. For example, in a different universe, I am not a YouTuber and you aren't watching YouTube. You're probably out there, doing something productive. But in our universe, I am unemployed and you are wasting valuable time listening to an unemployed guy talk about physics. I didn't go to college, by the way. Now, the many worlds interpretation is already pretty fascinating, but then an MIT physicist named Max Tegmark took that idea and cranked it up. He said, all right, if all of those parallel universes exist and your consciousness can only exist in a universe where you are alive, then from your own perspective, you never actually die. Because the moment you die in one universe, your consciousness just slips over to the nearest one where you survived. Every single time. Forever. Now that's called quantum immortality. It's kind of like, have any of you come close to death, like had a near-death experience? Well, what if instead of it being a near-death experience, what if you actually died? Say you were almost in a really bad car accident or someone almost hit you going 70 miles per hour. Quantum immortality says that, hey, in one universe, you did get into a car accident or you did get hit by that car going 70 miles per hour. And yeah, unfortunately, you died in that universe, but then your consciousness, in literally the blink of an eye, moved to a universe where you didn't get in that car accident. So does that make sense? No, that sounds great. I mean, we are all immortal. That's fantastic. Well, here's what the quantum immortality trap theory says. Every time your consciousness jumps to a surviving universe, it picks the closest possible version of survival, which means over time, the universes you're surviving into get weirder and weirder and more unlikely. You survive a car crash, but with 2 broken legs. You survive cancer, but barely. You survive things that statistically should have finished you off completely. You just keep getting older and more broken in increasingly improbable ways, with no way out. In universes, that looks less and less like the one that you started in. Now, the guy who literally came up with the many worlds theory, Hugh Everett himself, apparently believed completely that his own consciousness was immortal because of it, and he ended up dying of a heart attack at 51 years old. So either the theory is wrong, or somewhere out there, there's a version of Hugh Everett that is very old and has definitely seen some shit. Now, I'm not saying that you or I are currently immortal and, we have been quietly cheating death our whole entire lives without knowing it, but it's also like, think about every close call you've ever had. I mean, literally, I want you to think about them right now. And then after that, I want you to ask yourself, which version of reality are we in exactly? Or are you in? What is your consciousness in? The William Cooper 9/11 prediction. So there was a man named Milton William Cooper, or Bill for short, who ran a shortwave radio show called The Hour of the Time from his studio in Eager, Arizona. But on June 28th, 2001, 2.5 months before September 11th, Bill got on the mic and said, listen, I'm telling you guys right now, something terrible is going to happen in this country, and whatever happens, whatever it may be, they are going to blame it on Osama bin Laden. Now, this was right after the CNN interview where the guy went and interviewed bin Laden, and Bill Cooper told his audience, he said, hey, doesn't it strike you a little weird that the largest intelligence agency in the world with the biggest budget in history has been looking for this guy for years and can't find him, but a CNN camera crew just strolled right up and interviewed him? And then he said, something is being set up here. A major attack is coming, and Osama bin Laden is going to take the blame for it. Don't believe it. 2.5 months later, the Twin Towers came down. Now, on that same broadcast, Cooper made a second prediction. He told his audience that the government was going to come to his house in the middle of the night and shoot him dead on his doorstep. Those were his, I don't know if exact words, but pretty close to his exact words. Now, lo and behold, on November 5th, 2001, less than 2 months after 9/11, sheriff's deputies showed up at Bill Cooper's house in the middle of the night to arrest him on, I think it was like a years-old tax evasion charge, and I think there was also like an aggravated assault thrown in there. But shots were fired, and Bill Cooper was killed right there on his property, on his front doorstep. Now listen, Bill Cooper was a conspiracy theorist, But just because, you know, he was a conspiracy theorist doesn't make him crazy. I mean, look at me, I'm pretty normal. But not only did he predict that the US government would blame Osama bin Laden for an attack on America, but he also predicted that they would kill him in the middle of the night on his front doorstep. 2 for 2 from downtown. Now, if what Bill Cooper was saying on his radio show is true, or I guess was true, it doesn't just mean that he knew something that he wasn't supposed to, but it also confirms that 9/11 was an inside job, or it was something other than a terrorist attack, which has already been a conspiracy theory, I mean, literally since September 11th, 2001. So was he a really good guesser? Was he getting information from somewhere that he wasn't supposed to? Or did the right people just get a little too nervous about a guy on shortwave radio in rural Arizona who was starting to connect too many dots? Operation Paperclip Reversal Theory. So World War II ends and the Allies won. Everybody is celebrating and parading and, you know, doing whatever you do after a war. But what was the US government doing? Well, one, as we already know, they were stuffing stolen Nazi gold and treasures into their pockets, but they were also going around and recruiting a bunch of Nazi scientists. That's called Operation Paperclip. The US went out and found a bunch of scientists that were just working under Hitler, and then they scrubbed all of their records clean of war crimes, they gave them new identities, and then they flew them to America to go work for the US government. And this wasn't just a handful of scientists, there were 1,600 of them, the most famous one being Werner von Braun. Von Braun was literally a guy who selected concentration camp prisoners to be worked to death building rockets in Germany. And then after the war, the United States made him the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket that put us on the moon. Now again, that was Operation Paperclip. It's not a theory, that actually happened. But the official story of Operation Paperclip was, we brought scientists over, we took their knowledge, and then we used their knowledge to beat the Soviets in the space race. But the Operation Paperclip reversal theory says that we didn't just bring Nazi scientists over to be all scientific and, you know, help us build rockets. Apparently, they did other things. Now, all of these guys weren't just scientists, they were ideologues. They had spent their entire careers operating inside of a system where human beings were resources to be used in experiments, where the ends always justified the means, where if your research required test subjects, you just went and got some, and nobody asked questions about consent because consent wasn't a concept that was on the table. Now, that wasn't just a method, I mean, that was a worldview. So this theory asks, did that worldview come to the States with them? Because I mean, look at what happened almost immediately after Operation Paperclip. I mean, the CIA launched MK-Ultra, the actual documented program where the CIA was dosing people with LSD without their knowledge. We were going into hospitals and prisons and psychiatric wards, and we were testing sensory deprivation and electroshock and even hypnosis, all on American citizens. And mind you, this is without any consent. The whole goal being to see if we could eliminate the will of the person being examined. And guess what? One of the key MK-Ultra medical figures was a man named Kurt Blome. And yep, you guessed it, he was a Nazi scientist that we brought over after World War II. And we plugged his ass right into a program that was doing exactly what he was doing in concentration camps. MK-Ultra was a direct continuation of the Nazi experiments. The Operation Paperclip reversal theory is claiming that we didn't just bring Nazi scientists over here to help us build rockets. We brought them over for way more than that. We didn't just borrow their technology. We borrowed the idea that the state can do things to its own citizens that it would never admit to, because the supposed goal was important enough to justify it. The theory is saying that that didn't fade away when the Nazi scientists retired. For example, I mean, the torture techniques that were used at Guantanamo Bay, historians have traced those directly back to MK-Ultra research, which then traced back directly to Operation Paperclip, which then traced back directly to whatever was happening in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. After World War II, it was like, oh look, you know, the good guys won and the bad guys lost, justice was served. But then we took those bad guys who were doing these disgusting and very, very inhumane experiments on people in concentration camps. And mind you, I mean, probably a big handful of those test subjects were children. And we, the United States, said, hey, why don't you guys come over to the land of the free and continue your work? We would love to see how you guys are trying to demolish somebody's mind and brainwash them into becoming an assassin. Project Looking Glass. Now, during the Cold War, the CIA spent $20 million and 20 years of research trying to figure out if human beings could psychically observe classified locations from across the world just by sitting in a room and concentrating. That program was called Project Stargate, and it was declassified in 1995. And it is a completely real thing that happened with your tax dollars, so you're welcome. Now here's what's important. When they declassified Stargate, the CIA's own review said there were enough accurate results to defy pure randomness, but it was too unreliable to be useful for intelligence purposes. So they shut it down, officially. The Project Looking Glass theory says that that's where the public story ends and where the actual story begins. Because while the CIA was, running Stargate, something else was apparently happening at a classified underground facility called S4 inside of Area 51 in Nevada. And unlike Stargate, which was about psychically viewing the present, what was allegedly being developed at S4 was something considerably more alarming. It was a device that could view the future. Not predict it, not model it, but to look into the future. Now, the primary whistleblower is a man named Dan Borish. He was a former microbiologist and he was an alleged Area 51 employee. Now, according to Borish, Project Looking Glass was a barrel-shaped device with rotating rings, electromagnetic fields, and a plasma core, built using instructions decoded from ancient Sumerian cylinder seals that the government had acquired. Everybody following so far? Now, the device supposedly didn't just show you one future, it showed you probability fields, a vast branching spread of possible timelines weighted by likelihood that operators could navigate and then study. Want to know what happens if you invade this country? Well, look into the glass. You want to know the probable outcome of this upcoming election? Oh, just look into the glass. Want to know which of your policy decisions leads to the most favorable outcome for the people running the country? Look in the glass. Now, if a device like this existed and a small group of people had access to it, what you have is not just a technological advancement. What you have is the end of democracy as a meaningful concept. Every election, every war, every economic decision, every social movement, they're all pre-gamed and optimized by people who already knew how it was going to land before it happened. The rest of us are just living on the timeline that they selected. But then apparently something strange kind of happened. According to multiple accounts that all independently arrive at the same conclusion, by the mid-90s, the operators of Looking Glass started noticing something that they couldn't explain. No matter what variables they adjusted, no matter what timelines they explored, every single probability field started converging on the same point. All roads were leading to the same place. A fixed point in the future that couldn't be altered, it couldn't be avoided, and it couldn't be gamed. And then past that point, nothing. The timelines didn't branch. They just stopped. And that date, according to every account, was December 21st, 2012. Now, I know what you're thinking. I mean, everybody thought that, 2012 was the end of the world. But 2012 came and it went and we're all still here. Or I guess most of us are all here, I guess. But the theory doesn't say that the world ended in 2012. It says that 2012 was a pivot point, a moment where something fundamentally shifted. And what the device allegedly showed converging on that date was not an explosion or a catastrophe, but it was something that the people running the program found in some ways to be even more threatening than a big catastrophe or an explosion. I mean, it could have been a mass awakening or a convergence of human consciousness, or a point at which the control systems that had been running the world for decades would become visible to enough people that they couldn't be maintained anymore. And according to the whistleblowers, that's why the device was shut down. Not because it stopped working, but because it kept showing the same thing, and the people in the room didn't like what they saw. And so around 2006, the program was quietly dismantled, the technology was buried even deeper in the classified world, and the public version of the story, Project Stargate, the $20 million psychic program that didn't really work, was left as the thing that people would find if they went looking. Anyways, that has been the Internet's Darkest Theories, Volume 4. Now, if you guys did enjoy, I would really appreciate if you guys could leave a like, drop a comment, and click that subscribe button if you haven't. And if you want to keep watching, I'll pop some videos on screen that you can go and click around and go watch something else. But yeah, I hope you guys have a great start day. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.